My name's Glenn Ford and I'm Reader in Battlefield Archaeology at the University of Huddersfield.
Is battlefield archaeology of public interest in England?
Oh yes, I mean we just did a Time Team programme with Tony Pollard and various others, Tim, and yeah, you get millions of viewers and they're really interested in not just the guns but the whole process of how do you study battlefields. When
started battlefield archaeology in England?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Modern battlefield archaeology really is the mid-1990s. We first started working at places like Naseby, where I worked. Tim was working at Towton a few years later. So it's the end of the 1990s, mid to late 1990s. But the big projects didn't start until the turn of the millennium.
And what was your projects?
Well, I worked on a series. The first project I worked on was the Battle of Naseby, one of the great battles of the English Civil War. Then I moved on to look at the first battle of the English Civil War, which was Edge Hill, 1642. And then in more recent times, we've been working backwards on the Battle of Bosworth, which is 1485. And there we're looking at the origins of artillery, at the early use of artillery on battlefields. And the next project we're moving on to is the Battle of Hastings, 1066.
It's much more difficult to find these medieval battlefields than these modern ones. What is the reason?
It's the matter of the archaeology, the type of archaeology you get on earlier battlefields compared to later ones. It's also a matter of the documents. And what we found with Bosworth, for example, we spent 4 years looking for the Battle of Bosworth. And the first problem was that the documents tell you something about the battle, but very little. The landscape's changed enormously, so you have to understand what was the landscape like, and then try to put the pieces together. But it's only really when you get down to looking at the archaeology that you can pinpoint the location. If you're dealing with a battle like Naseby or Edge Hill, which we worked on some years ago, you get lots of bullets, you get lots of other artefacts, buckles and buttons and so forth. Once you move back into the 15th century, it becomes far, far more difficult. For example, at Bosworth, we've spent a whole year intensively looking at the battlefield and we've found 34 lead projectiles. At Edge Hill we found over 1,000. So it's much, much more difficult. There are far fewer objects on most medieval battlefields.
Do you believe that you will find the battlefield of Hastings? Or is it known where it is? Because, for example, Tim told us that they look for Azincourt and it's not there.
The problem is knowing whether there is any archaeology left in the ground. Does it survive? And so you might even be on the battlefield. I mean, we're fairly confident that we know where Hastings was fought because William built a monastery supposedly at the very place where Harold died, King Harold died. So you've got that focus, and we're going to look around that outside that monastery in the area where everyone says the battle was fought. The problem is if we don't find anything, it won't necessarily mean the battlefield is elsewhere. So the earlier you go, the more difficult battlefield archaeology is.
We know a lot about the historical battlefields because we have historical sources. What is the new insight from battlefield archaeology?
There are a whole series of things that battlefield archaeology can do that documents can't tell us, provides information. For example, the work we've been doing on early guns, you have guns surviving, you have documents that tell you about the guns, but you don't know what they're describing. The words for the guns in the 15th century are quite complicated, the terms. When you go to the battlefield, you recover the round shot that was fired. That tells you the size, the type of guns that were firing it. So you've got a chance there, for example, to understand the types of guns that were in use, how many guns were in use. And we're talking about an early period of artillery. So the physical evidence will take you into places that the documents can't take you. And the earlier you get, the more important the archaeological evidence becomes.
What can we learn from these bullets?
If you're looking at something like in the 17th century, you've got thousands and thousands. I mean, I can't remember, is it about 2,000-3,000 from Lutzen now? The importance of that is that there is such a large assemblage, you can begin to look statistically at it to understand the different calibers, the different types of weapon in use. For example, when we worked on Edge Hill, it became very clear that the artillery was firing large numbers of lead ball in cases, and that created a pattern on the battlefield. We did experimental work to reproduce that pattern. You can then go back to the battlefield and those distributions of case shot will tell you where the artillery pieces were placed. And of course, with the 17th century battle, quite often, the artillery are between each of the regiments or each of the battalions. Once you have those guns, you then have the battalions. So archaeology of bullets will take you back to certain positions on the battlefield. That's just one example, but there are many ways you can use the bullets.
What can we learn from the single bullets? Because they have traces on it.
One bullet on its own tells you very little. You can't even be absolutely certain it comes from the battle. It could be from later sporting shooting. It's only when you've got a large number of bullets, then you can begin to look at the patterns. And you get patterns across the battlefield. That's the point at which understanding individual ones.
Patterns on the bullets.
Sorry, say again?
You have also patterns on the bullets.
I see what you mean. Yes, you have to understand an individual bullet.
Yes.
So, for example, has it been fired or hasn't it? Has it hit something or not? Was it fired from a gun on its own? Was it fired from an artillery piece? You can answer those questions. That information for one bullet doesn't tell you very much. If you have 1,000 bullets analysed in that way, then you get patterns. And it's those patterns across the battlefield that tell you the big story.
Should battlefields be protected?
It's a really important issue. It's something in England we're trying to tackle at the moment. A lot of our battlefields are being very badly damaged by treasure hunting, by agriculture. Agriculture can destroy the objects in the ground. And actually getting the right mechanisms in place to be able to protect the battlefield from treasure hunters, to take some of the ground out of cultivation perhaps, to protect the mass graves. They're things we're beginning to work with. In England we have grant schemes through the European Community, European Union, and they can be used to change the mechanisms that are used in agriculture. That is a way of protecting the battlefield. But we haven't yet got that right. We don't understand enough about what agriculture is doing to our archaeology to know exactly how to protect it.
What about this Lutzen project? What do you think about what the work is done here and about your cooperation?
I think the most important thing about Lutzen and the work that's going on here is simply the scale of the work. The number of people over so many years is giving you a very detailed picture, probably the most detailed picture of a whole battlefield when you've finished that will exist anywhere in Europe. We will learn much more about that than, say, we were able to do at Edge Hill. We didn't have anywhere near the same number of hours to work on the battlefield. So it's going to be that scale of work that will make Lutzen one of the key sites across Europe. I think the other thing Lutzen's done is you've enabled a number of battlefield archaeologists from different parts of Europe to come together and discuss and explore the techniques that we're using. And that's really important because we all work in slightly different ways and we've got a lot to learn from each other. So
the cooperation, this internet cooperation is very important.
I think it's It's an important first step, and I think it's something that should continue, and not just at Lutzen now. We should take Lutzen as an example and work in a similar way on other battlefields in Europe.
How do you see the future of the battlefield archaeology?
I think it'll depend on what happens in two ways. One is the sort of work that's going on in Lutzen and how much you can make, how much more you can say about an individual battle from that scale intensity of work. That will determine one avenue. The other is looking back in time, the sort of thing we're trying to do with medieval battlefields. If we get good results, and some work like Bo's work in Sweden is producing results, if we can take other sites like Hastings and we can push back in time, then I think that's another important avenue there where there'll be major advances. But we need to see over the next 5 years what happens.
What are your results in Bosworth?
In Bosworth, I think what we did at Bosworth that was important is two things. One, we took a battlefield that's been lost for 200 years and we found the true site. And that was a major task, but it proved that even with a medieval battlefield that's lost, if you do all the right things in terms of modern battlefield archaeology, you can solve the problem. So that was the first thing. The second thing about Bosworth was the artillery. Nobody before has seen the scale of evidence for early artillery. We may only have 34 lead projectiles, big ones. But that's more than anyone's ever seen before from a single battlefield. And we've got a distribution pattern. That's beginning to raise questions about how early guns were used. And it's opened up a whole range of possibilities. So I think Bosworth for me is the most important project I've ever worked on.
What do you want to find if you can wish?
On any battlefield?
On any battlefield.
I think before I retire, I would like to be able to do large-scale work at Hastings and prove that that is the site and find a genuine pattern of archaeology across that battlefield because it is the quintessential English battlefield. If that turns up good archaeology, then I think that will be the best result.
But I think there must be archaeology there because the Saxons worked with the axes, but the Normans are shooting with arrows, so you should find something.
There should be something if the ground conditions are right, but it's nearly 950 years. Nobody's gone back that far with an ordinary battlefield. There are no special preservation conditions at Hastings, that's the problem.
So, thank you very much for the questions.